talk a little bit about emotional intelligence, a very important concept. In fact, research has found that emotional intelligence is more important than IQ. Your personal life, your school life, your academic life, your career life, all is benefited by emotional intelligence. So what is this important concept? We have two parts of emotional intelligence. One is intrapersonal emotional intelligence, and that is how well you know your own emotions and is important, and can control those emotions. The other part is interpersonal emotional intelligence, and that is how well you can read other people and you can adjust what you are doing with those other people in order to understand the interaction between yourself and their emotions. So let me give you a little bit of research and tell you a little bit about how important this concept is. There's a very famous study called the Stanford study where children were taken about the age of 6, and they were given all sorts of tasks to determine emotional intelligence. For example, one task was to see how well they could control their own impulses and emotions. Their parents were told not to give them breakfast, a little hungry. We didn't starve these poor children, but just no breakfast that morning. And the experimenter came in and he had a few marshmallows on the table and he pretended like the phone was ringing and then said, "Excuse me, the phone's ringing. I'm going to go out, but don't eat those marshmallows. I'll be right back. Those are for a reward for you later." And then they watched and filmed these children through a two-way mirror. As a result of several of these tasks, they determined which children already had a very good sense of both interpersonal and intrapersonal emotional intelligence. They also divided the children into 3 groups. One group was those groups that already had what we call EQ skills, emotional intelligence skills. One group, they had several EQ lessons a year for 5 or 6 years. And then the other group did not have EQ skills and they did nothing. So one group was taught emotional intelligence, one group had it already, and one group had no emotional intelligence. And they followed these children for approximately 12 to 14 years. And what they found were that the 2 groups, the ones that were taught emotional intelligence and the ones that had emotional intelligence, both did better in academics. They had more friends. They scored higher on happiness scales. And this is really interesting. They scored significantly higher even on their SATs. It is important to note that these kids came from similar socioeconomic backgrounds and had similar IQs, and so the only difference was EQ. So why is EQ so important? Because if we know ourselves and our own emotions, we can understand how to control them. We can understand what our best way to learn was. Some people were very surprised at the finding that these children had better grades and better SAT scores that had EQ or were taught EQ. But if you know your learning styles, if you know yourself, then you're going to do everything better. So let me close this with a true story about EQ and also a joke. Both of them are a little bit funny, but one is a true story. Let me tell you the true story. Some of you may know that my background training is psychology. I have a PhD in psychology. I had a couple clients come in once. This is a true story class. They were on the verge of divorce, and the husband said to me, "I don't want a divorce. I don't want this. I want to be married. My wife is everything to me." So he desperately wanted to stay in this marriage. The wife said, "You know, I'm really feeling like no connection here, and I do want a divorce, but you know, I've invested a lot, so I've decided to go ahead and come in and see what happens from marital therapy." So the two came in, and the husband explains that he's never had any friends, that she is his whole world, the only girl he's ever dated. He's never developed any sort of emotional intelligence. Whereas the wife has had lots of friends, lots of life experience, seems to be very emotionally intelligent. Well, they come in for a few sessions, and then after about 3 sessions, the wife says, you know, I'm pregnant now, and so I'm very committed to this baby, so let's see what happens. I've decided to stay in the marriage. Well, the baby is born, they go home, the wife is passing the room where the baby's in the crib, and she sees her husband looking lovingly over that crib. And she stands there watching him for about 5 minutes, and he's just staring into the crib. So she walks up, she puts her arm around him, and she's so glad she stayed in the marriage, and she said, honey, what are you thinking? And he looks at her and then looks at the crib with absolute amazement, and he says, you know what, honey? I just cannot believe the bargain we got on this crib. It only cost $49. So there you go. That marriage didn't stay together even though he desperately wanted. There's an example, a real example of emotional intelligence. Let me also tell you a quick joke just to end this so you can get a little chuckle. This is emotional intelligence jokes. It didn't really happen. There is a plane, and in the plane is Albert Einstein, the President of the United States, an old man, and a little boy. Suddenly they come into turbulence. The plane is rocking, and the lightning strikes the wing of the plane, and the pilot runs in and says, the plane is going to crash. The engine just went out. I'm not a brave pilot. I'm not going down with this ship. And unfortunately, we have one less parachute than the number of people. I know where they are, so I'm going to take the first parachute. And he grabs the parachute and he jumps out the door. The President of the United States says, I'm the President of the United States, and the world needs me, so I'm going to take a parachute. And he takes one and jumps out. Einstein says, I'm the smartest man in the world, and the world needs me, so I'm going to take a parachute. And he grabs it and he jumps out. The old man looks at the little boy and he says, there's only one parachute left, and I have lived my life, he says, so you go ahead and take that. And the little boy smiles and he looks at the old man and he says, you know what? Einstein, the smartest man in the world, wasn't very emotionally smart. He took my backpack. So there you go. Work on your emotional intelligence. We have an assignment for it. It's a very important concept.